Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the 7th entry in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Released in 1994 and directed by the legend Wes Craven, the movie follows the real life of Heather Langenkamp, who played Nancy in the original Elm Street, and with her son Dylan and husband Chase. Where strange and weird things are happening, with Freddy coming into the real world, and the only way to stop it is to make another movie to defeat Freddy once and for all. It's a real clever movie and it brings Freddy back as a total evil villain, and I think this could be Freddy at his most darkest. Now, even though in this movie Heather plays both herself and Nancy, I am going to be referring to her as Nancy in this video just to keep things simple. So grab yourselves a cuppa and get yourselves comfy and let's take a look at 10 moments from Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Number 10, opening scene. Okay, so the movie begins and it looks like we are in some sort of dungeon, and we see someone making a glove. Sound familiar? This person then picks up a meat cleaver and cuts off his own hand. It's at this point we realise that we are watching a movie being made, and this is all just special effects. Nancy is there with her husband Chase and son Dylan, who are both on the movie set. We see a big metal Freddy claw that's being made, and it looks really cool. All of a sudden though, the claw moves on its own, and Chase takes a look but ends up cutting his fingers when the claw moves once again. But then all of a sudden, the claw becomes alive and starts killing the crew members one by one, and then the claw starts running around in the studio and everyone starts to panic. One of the crew members ends up falling on top of Chase, and then the claw comes for him, clawing its way up the crew member's back and there's blood flying, and then it goes into Chase's face, but then we all realise it's a dream when Nancy wakes up in the house in the middle of an earthquake. It's a real strong opening scene, and I guess you're wondering, where is this movie going? Number 9, Chase's death. One of the first proper kills of the movie now, and Chase is driving home to his family after his son Dylan has fallen ill. It's late at night and Chase starts to drift off to sleep, but he wakes up when his car starts to drift. It's classic Nightmare on Elm Street when someone starts to fall asleep but then they end up waking themselves up, and us, the audience, are waiting to see when the nightmare really begins. Chase starts to sing a song to try and keep himself awake, and the camera then pans down to Chase's crotch area, where all of a sudden Freddy Krueger's finger knives come through the seat. That is not where you want Freddy's fingers to appear. Anyway, the fingers get closer to Chase's crotch, and one of the fingers scratches his jeans. Chase then looks down and he thinks he just has a bit of an itch to scratch. We've all been there. But then all of a sudden, Freddy's glove comes flying out through the car seat and into Chase's chest. The claw starts to rip down from the chest and all the way down his body, before Chase then crashes his car, killing him instantly. Number 8, identifying the body. After the police tell Nancy that Chase has been killed in a car crash, Nancy demands to see his body. So Nancy goes down to the morgue, and what I love about this scene is how eerie and haunting the music really is. It just gives you the feeling of dread. Nancy goes down the corridor and then sees a group of men and tells them that she's here to see her husband Chase. So one of the guys takes her to his body and he lifts up the blanket just to show his head. Nancy notices some scratch marks just at the start of the chest, but the morgue guy, he ends up putting the blanket down so Nancy doesn't see it. But Nancy tells him to lift up the sheet one more time, and when he does, she orders him to lift it up even more. Nancy then pulls the blanket and she sees the claw marks all the way down Chase's body, and she ends up being sick. The morgue guy, he's trying to console her, but Nancy tells him that it looks like that her husband was clawed to death. Number 7, Graveside Nightmare. We are at Chase's funeral now, and everyone is there. Nancy, Dylan, even all the actors from the previous Nightmare movies are there. But Nancy starts to have a nightmare as an earthquake hits, and Chase's coffin falls into the hole. So Nancy tries to stop it from falling, and when she turns around to see where Dylan is, Dylan has disappeared. She then hears a deep Freddy laugh, and she looks down into the grave hole, and she sees Dylan being pulled into the ground by Freddy. So Nancy jumps in and grabs Dylan, where she sees the Freddy claw right behind Dylan's feet. She manages to get him out, but then all of a sudden, a dead Chase starts to slide out of his coffin and on top of Nancy and Dylan, where he suddenly opens up his eyes and tells Nancy to stay with him. Nancy understandably freaks out and starts screaming. It's at this point she wakes up. It's a creepy moment, and I can remember thinking, how messed up is this, because I first watched it in 1994 and I think I was probably only about 7 years old, and I think having a young child being pulled into the ground by a menacing Freddy Krueger, it really is the stuff of children's nightmares, and I absolutely love it. Number 6, Hand Out of the Bed. There are some great scenes in this movie. It's full of classic Freddy moments, but this one always stands out for me. When Nancy is asleep in bed, Freddy's fingers come through the sheets and they slide up towards her. Freddy's glove then slowly comes out of the bed and into the air, where Freddy is about to grab Nancy. Just when you think Nancy is for it, she wakes up after a load of pans fall in the kitchen, and Freddy's hand then disappears back into the bed. It's a great callback to the moment in Nightmare 1 when Nancy was in the bathtub and Freddy's glove appeared between her legs. But I also think it's another nice callback to that moment when Glenn was pulled into the bed and turned into a pile of blood. Number 5, Nancy's hospital nightmare. After Dylan starts having seizures, he is rushed into hospital where the doctors and the nurses are running tests on him. In a scene where Dylan is wired up to some machines, Nancy is there at his bedside. She starts to fall asleep until she hears a loud beeping sound. It's at this moment Dylan then wakes up and rips open the hospital sheet. Dylan then puts on this creepy demonic voice, telling his mum that he's almost there. He then proceeds to go all exorcist on us, and he spits a load of green gunk all over his mum. The nurses then come running in, where they hold Nancy back while they see to Dylan. Dr. Hefner then comes in and tells the nurses that she's going in. Next minute, Freddy's claw appears on the doctor's hand, and the doctor then looks at Nancy and says, "Let's cut this evil out of him," before turning into Freddy. Nancy then jumps up and flies onto Dylan's bed, where she wakes up, and Dylan has actually woken up and he's been taken to another part of the hospital. I really love this scene, and it does make me wonder if this was a little bit of a tribute to The Exorcist, because it certainly felt like it. Number 4, Julie the Babysitter's death. A great death scene now in our next spot, and babysitter Julie is with Dylan looking after him while Nancy is taken away by the doctors to answer some questions about Dylan's state of mind. Nancy tells Julie not to let Dylan fall asleep. However, when two nurses come into the room, one of them injects Dylan with some sleeping aids while Julie is distracted. Julie then literally punches one of the nurses in the face and throws the other one out, and then Julie tries to keep Dylan awake. However, it's too late. Freddy pops up behind her, but only Dylan can see Freddy because Dylan is actually asleep. Freddy then attacks Julie from behind and starts slicing and dicing her and dragging her all the way up the wall and onto the ceiling, the same way Freddy killed Tina in Nightmare 1. Freddy then toys with Julie for a little bit before finally killing her and throwing her to the ground, and Dylan ends up sleepwalking out of the hospital. It's a fantastic scene. Number 3, Freeway Horror. A nail-biting moment now at our next spot, and Dylan has managed to sleepwalk from the hospital onto a very busy freeway. Nancy drives around looking for his son, and she spots him just as he's about to cross the busy road. Up in the sky, a massive Freddy Krueger appears. Dylan then crosses the road and has some real crazy near misses with some cars and some trucks. The massive Freddy Krueger in the sky then uses his massive claw to pick up Dylan and dangle him around the moving vehicles. Nancy runs across the freeway and tries to save Dylan but ends up getting run over. Freddy eventually lets Dylan go, and as Dylan looks behind him, he literally sees about 20 or 30 Freddy Kruegers running towards him at the fence, and Dylan makes a run for it. Nancy, meanwhile, is helped off the ground after being run over, and she goes looking for his son. It's a brilliant dramatic moment which is full of stunts, and the scene will literally have you looking through your hands the whole time. Number 2, Freddy tries to eat Dylan. Literally one of the most messed up Freddy moments now. In one of the final showdowns with Freddy, Nancy and Dylan are both asleep and they're in Freddy's nightmare, which is in some sort of ancient evil dungeon. There is a moment where Freddy is chasing Dylan through this dungeon, and Dylan climbs into a half-burning furnace to try and escape Freddy. Freddy tries to climb in after Dylan, but he's a little bit too big to fit through the hole. So Freddy then stretches his whole arm to get Dylan, like literally Freddy's arm gets longer and longer like a snake until he has hold of Dylan. Freddy then pulls Dylan towards him and literally tells Dylan that he is going to eat him up. Freddy then starts to open his mouth wider and wider and wider, and it's really messed up. Freddy's head just expands while his mouth is opening, and his tongue is literally doing this disgusting wiggle thing that just gives me the creeps. Freddy then pulls Dylan into his mouth, like Freddy is literally trying to swallow Dylan whole, and it's really disturbing. Luckily, Nancy arrives on the scene and stabs Freddy from behind, and Dylan manages to break free just as Freddy's head goes back to normal. Before we get to number 1, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We currently upload new videos every week and we are really looking to grow this channel, so make sure to hit that notification bell as well. Number 1, Freddy is finally destroyed. As any Nightmare on Elm Street film, evil never wins in the end, not really. Freddy might come back into multiple sequels, but he always has a good death scene, and I actually really enjoy this one. After Nancy saves Dylan from being eaten alive by Freddy, Dylan manages to escape out of a side hatch, and they both end up pushing Freddy into the furnace, and they then turn the furnace up on full. Freddy is then stuck in there looking around and looking worried, and then all of a sudden the fire goes up. And Freddy then starts to let off this demonic growl, and his whole body starts to expand and his eyes are popping out, and then the furnace blows up. Nancy and Dylan make a run for it, and then the whole of the dungeons, they all start to blow up, which I thought was a really cool stunt the way they did it. There were multiple huge explosions, pretty much destroying everything. Nancy and Dylan then manage to wake up and they fly out of the bed. And all is well with the world. And Freddy Krueger is no more. Well, not until Freddy vs. Jason anyway. And that was 10 moments from Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So guys, what did you think of the list? Have you seen this movie before? If so, what do you think of it? Now, I know the movie didn't get great reviews when it was first released in 1994, but I've always felt that the movies had gained a huge cult following, especially in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, but let me know what you think of the movie in the comments box below. For me personally, I think it's up there in the top 3 Freddy movies. Okay guys, well that's all I have for you today. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, stay safe, and I'll see you all again very soon.